Look at this one. Drown-proofing is for warriors, not little girls playing dress-up. Tie her up, hands and feet. Let's see how long she lasts." The words, spoken by Gunnery Sergeant Thorne, cracked through the humid, chlorine-scented air of the natatorium like a whip. The crowd of trainees, a sea of burly, nervous young men in identical fatigues, chuckled uneasily. Their laughter was a pathetic attempt to curry favor with the instructor, a man whose reputation for brutality was matched only by the volume of his voice. They looked at the woman standing at the edge of the pool. Master Sergeant Eva Rostova was, by all appearances, completely unremarkable. Her frame was slight, her features plain, her brown hair pulled back in a bun so severe it seemed to pull the skin taut at her temples. She looked more like a logistics clerk who had taken a wrong turn than a participant in one of the military's most grueling water survival courses. She offered no reaction to the insult. No flicker of anger, no hint of fear. Her face was a placid mask of professional neutrality. Instead of protesting, she simply turned and presented her wrists, then her ankles, for the rough burlap bindings. Her movements were economical, precise, utterly devoid of wasted energy. But high above, on the glass-walled observation deck, an old Master Chief Petty Officer leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. He was a legend in the naval special warfare community, a man known only as Breaker, and he saw what the others missed. He saw the subtle, almost imperceptible shift in Rostova's center of gravity as she prepared for the bindings. He saw the way her chest expanded not with a panicked gasp, but with a slow, controlled intake of air, a deliberate preparation. It was a stance, a posture, a silent language of readiness he hadn't seen in 20 years. It was the calm of a predator, not the fear of prey. He felt a cold knot of anticipation in his gut. Down on the pool deck, Thorne was just getting started. If you believe true strength is forged in silence, type unbroken below. Gunnery Sergeant Thorne paced before the line of trainees, using the bound Master Sergeant as his personal teaching aid. His voice, a gravelly megaphone of arrogance, echoed off the tiled walls, each word a hammer blow intended to forge fear into respect. "See this," he bellowed, jabbing a thick finger toward Rostova. "This is what complacency looks like. This is the assumption that your training back at some cushy desk job will save you when the water closes over your head. But I'm here to tell you, the water doesn't care about your rank. It doesn't care about your feelings. It is the great equalizer." He circled her, his boots squeaking on the wet floor. In here, he slapped the shimmering surface of the pool with the back of his hand, sending droplets flying. "There is no gear to save you. There is no team to pull you out. There is only you, the pressure in your lungs, and the will to survive." A will. He leaned in close to her face, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial sneer. "That I am just not seeing." He tapped her helmet with a condescending flick of his finger. The trainees, now fully indoctrinated into Thorne's narrative, watched with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. They saw her as he did, the designated failure, the object lesson. They saw her quietness not as control, but as a prelude to panic. They were wrong. Rostova had tuned him out completely. His voice was just ambient noise, irrelevant data in a complex tactical problem. Her mind was a silent, efficient calculator. Her eyes scanned the pool, absorbing details. The depth markers at the bottom, 15 feet. The position of the main drains, noting the subtle pull of their currents. The refraction of the overhead lights on the water's surface, which could be used to orient herself. She was breaking down the environment into a series of variables to be managed. Her breathing, already slow and meditative, deepened further. She was engaging in a physiological process known as the mammalian diving reflex, consciously lowering her heart rate, preparing her body to operate in an oxygen-deprived state. The burlap bindings were coarse against her skin, cinched painfully tight by one of Thorne's sycophantic assistants. She didn't struggle against them. Instead, she made a series of minute, controlled flexes in her forearms and calves, not to test their strength, but to map their exact tension, to understand the mechanics of her confinement. She was not a victim waiting for the inevitable. She was a professional preparing for the work to come. "All right, sweetheart. Time to sink or swim," Thorne barked, the final words of his lecture delivered with a dismissive wave. Two of his larger instructors, eager to please, grabbed Rostova by the arms. They were rough, their grips unnecessarily firm, but she remained utterly placid, a dead weight in their hands. They half-dragged, half-carried her to the edge of the deep end of the vast, Olympic-sized training pool. The water below was a dark, uninviting abyss, its coldness radiating upwards. The air hung heavy, thick with the chemical tang of chlorine and the palpable tension of the assembled trainees. This was the moment of truth, the theatrical climax of Thorne's lesson in humility. As the instructors swung her forward, preparing to heave her into the depths, Rostova executed her final preparation. She took one last, deep, and impossibly slow breath. It was not the desperate gasp of a drowning victim, but the precise, methodical inflation of a high-performance engine. She was packing, a dangerous technique used by elite freedivers to force more air into the lungs than a normal breath would allow. To the ignorant eye, it looked like nothing. To the trained observer on the deck above, it was a profound statement of intent. With her lungs filled to their absolute capacity, she relaxed every single muscle in her body, from her eyelids to her toes. She became a stone. They threw her in. She entered the water with a quiet, clean splash, a sound swallowed almost immediately by the vastness of the pool. She did not flail. She did not fight. She simply sank, a silent, bound figure descending into the blue gloom. The trail of bubbles that followed her was minuscule, a testament to her phenomenal breath control. With a theatrical flourish, Thorne clicked the button on his large, black stopwatch. "Time has started," he shouted to the class, a gleeful, predatory grin spreading across his face. 10 seconds. The body's natural buoyancy will fight back soon. Then the panic sets in. Any bets on when she breaks? I say she panics at 30 seconds flat. He was playing to his audience, cementing his authority through this ritual of public humiliation, utterly unaware that he was not the predator in this scenario. He was the fool. The large red digits on Thorne's stopwatch ticked past 30 seconds. The smug grin on his face faltered, replaced by a slight, almost imperceptible frown. 45 seconds. The nervous energy among the trainees dissipated, replaced by a heavy, watchful silence. They were no longer anticipating a lesson in failure. They were witnessing something they could not comprehend. A full minute passed. The only sounds in the cavernous natatorium were the gentle lapping of water against the pool's edge and the hum of the ventilation system. Thorne cleared his throat, his voice losing some of its booming confidence. A minute 30, she's just holding her breath. It's a classic panic response delay. Any second now, the mammalian brain will take over. Any second, he was trying to reaffirm his own narrative, to force reality to conform to his prejudiced assumptions. But reality was proving to be stubborn. Down below, in the silent, pressurized world at the bottom of the pool, Rostova began to move. It was not the spastic, desperate struggle of a drowning person. It was a symphony of controlled, fluid motion. First, a powerful, undulating wave traveled from her core down through her bound legs, a perfect dolphin kick that lifted her gracefully from the tiled floor. She began to bob. As she sank, she exhaled a tiny, controlled stream of bubbles, just enough to manage her buoyancy. Then, with a coordinated, full-body pulse, a violent contraction of every muscle from her shoulders to her ankles, she launched herself toward the distant, shimmering ceiling of the surface. She broke through, her face tilted to the sky, and took a single, quick, efficient sip of air before allowing herself to sink again. Bob. Breathe. Survive. The trainees watched, mesmerized. They had been taught a rudimentary version of this, but what they were seeing was different. It was mastery. Then, she did something that defied all logic and expectation. During one of her underwater phases, she arched her back with the flexibility of a gymnast, tucking her knees to her chest. In a display of raw core strength that seemed impossible for her slight frame, she brought her bound feet up and over her head, toward her face. The trainees let out a collective, audible gasp. Thorne's jaw hung open, the stopwatch forgotten in his hand. "No way," he whispered, the words barely audible. That's not possible." High above, Master Chief Breaker leaned against the glass, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his weathered face. He knew exactly what he was seeing. And he knew this arrogant gunnery sergeant's world was about to be turned completely upside down. Rostova's teeth, strong and sure, found the wet, swollen not of the burlap binding her wrists. The material was coarse and unforgiving, designed to tighten with struggle, but she did not struggle. Her movements were patient, methodical, a series of tiny, precise pulls and twists learned through countless hours of practice in conditions far worse than this sterile training pool. While the stunned audience watched from above, the heavy double doors to the pool deck swung open. Master Chief Petty Officer Breaker descended the metal stairs from the observation deck, his footsteps echoing with an authority that commanded instant reverence. His presence was a physical force, and the already quiet room fell into an absolute, tomb-like silence. Even Gunnery Sergeant Thorne, his face a mask of pale confusion, snapped to a rigid brace, his eyes wide with a dawning sense of dread. Breaker ignored him. His gaze was fixed on the woman in the water, who had just freed her hands and was now calmly working on the knots at her ankles, treading water with an easy, effortless grace. The Master Chief walked directly to the instructor's console, a stainless steel podium that held the day's training roster and a ruggedized laptop. With a few swift, deliberate keystrokes, he bypassed the standard login screen. He tapped the roster, his finger landing on the single name that was out of place, Rostova, E.T.D.Y. He clicked it. A heavily redacted personnel file flashed onto the screen. Most of it was a sea of blacked-out paragraphs, but a few lines were left visible, stark and damning in their clarity. The narrator's voice, once descriptive, now became a staccato litany of undeniable fact. Unit, 24th Special Tactics Squadron. Designation, Combat Controller. Qualifications, Master Dive Supervisor. Master Parachutist. Military Free Fall Jump Master. Static Line Jump Master. Combat Experience, over 2,000 hours of classified operations. More combat dives than every single instructor on this deck combined. Last assignment listed, Operation Neptune's Spear, redacted. Medals and citations, the Air Force Cross. The Silver Star with 2 oak leaf clusters. The Purple Heart. The final, most chilling line was a simple designation. Classification, Tier 1. Just as this information filled the screen, Rostova finished untying her feet. She swam to the pool ladder with a smooth, powerful breaststroke, each movement a model of efficiency. She climbed out, water streaming from her fatigues, and without a single wasted motion, stood at a perfect parade rest, her eyes fixed forward. Breaker walked over to her, stopping directly in front of her. He didn't speak. He simply came to attention and rendered a slow, formal, perfect salute. A Master Chief saluting a Master Sergeant. In the rigid world of military hierarchy, it was an act of profound, almost shocking respect, a public gesture that shattered every assumption Thorne had built his lesson upon. Rostova returned the salute with crisp precision, her movements as economical as ever. Master Chief Breaker held it for a moment longer, his eyes conveying a universe of shared understanding before dropping his hand. He then turned, his body language radiating a cold, controlled fury, and faced the stunned assembly. His gaze swept over the silent trainees before finally landing on the mortified Gunnery Sergeant Thorne. When Breaker spoke, his voice was not loud like Thorne's had been. It was quiet, low, and terrifyingly calm, a voice that carried the immense weight of decades of command and combat. Gunnery Sergeant Thorne, he began, the words cutting through the air like shards of ice. The technique you just had the privilege of witnessing is called the dolphin's breath. It was developed by pararescue jumpers in the jungles of Vietnam to survive being shot down in flooded rice paddies while bound by their captors. It is not in any of your training manuals. It is taught in exactly one place on this entire planet. And you do not get to volunteer for that course. You have to be invited. He let the words hang in the air, allowing their full import to sink in. That woman, he said, nodding toward Rostova, who remained at parade rest, a statue of stoic professionalism. The one you just tried to humiliate for the entertainment of your class is one of fewer than a dozen living masters of that technique on active duty. She was not sent here to be evaluated by you. She was sent here to evaluate your facility. The revelation landed like a physical blow. The trainees shifted uncomfortably, their faces a mixture of awe and shame. Thorne's face had gone from pale to ashen. Breaker took a step closer to him, his voice dropping even lower. You assumed weakness because you saw a woman. You assumed incompetence because you saw a quiet professional. You let your ego write a check that your experience couldn't possibly cash. You made the most dangerous mistake a leader can make. You confused the absence of boasting with the absence of ability. That mistake, in our line of work, gets people killed. Class dismissed. The finality in his tone was absolute. As the trainees scrambled to exit, Breaker's final command froze Thorne in place. "Thorne, my office." Now, it was not a request. It was a summons to judgment. The story of what happened in the natatorium that afternoon spread through the sprawling military base like wildfire. It traveled on whispers in the chow hall line, on encrypted text messages between squadrons, and in hushed, reverent conversations in the barracks after lights out. As with all legends, the details began to grow with each telling. Some said Master Sergeant Rostova had held her breath for a full 10 minutes. Others swore they'd heard she chewed through steel cable, not burlap rope. But the core of the story, the undeniable truth of it, remained intact and potent. The quiet, unassuming Master Sergeant who had single-handedly and silently dismantled the loudest, most arrogant instructor on the base with nothing but pure, unadulterated competence. The trainees who had been present spoke of it with a kind of religious awe. They had gone to the pool that day expecting a lesson in survival. They had left with a profound education in humility and respect. Gunnery Sergeant Thorne was not dishonorably discharged. Master Chief Breaker knew that wasting a man with Thorne's years of experience would be a foolish indulgence. Instead, Thorne was fundamentally broken down and rebuilt. His meeting in Breaker's office was the stuff of hushed legend itself, a brutal but meticulously fair vivisection of his professional and personal failings. He was reassigned to a logistics desk in a windowless basement for 6 months, an enforced period of quiet, humbling reflection far from the eyes of adoring trainees. When he finally returned to an instructor role, the swaggering, bombastic gunnery sergeant was gone forever. In his place stood a quieter, more observant man. He treated every single trainee, regardless of their size, gender, or perceived attitude, with a baseline of professional respect. He understood now that the quiet ones were the ones to watch. He began every new drown-proofing course not with a boast, but with a story, the story of Master Sergeant Eva Rostova, using his own monumental failure as the ultimate teaching point on the dangers of assumption. He was, by all accounts, a far better instructor for it. As for Rostova, she completed her facility evaluation. Her final report was a model of professional objectivity, a brutally honest, technically precise document that highlighted systemic flaws in safety protocols but made no personal mention of Thorne's behavior. To her, his insults were irrelevant data, noise that had no bearing on the mission. Before she departed the base, a young female airman, one of the trainees from that fateful class, approached her nervously. "Master Sergeant," she stammered, "how did you do that? How did you stay so calm?" Rostova looked at the young woman, her gaze direct and unwavering. She offered no lecture, no war story, no boast. She gave her a simple, powerful truth. "Control your breathing," Rostova said. "Everything else follows." Then she turned and walked away, her job done. The legacy of that day did not fade with memory. Master Chief Breaker ensured it would be etched into the very architecture of the institution. A few weeks after Rostova's departure, a team of maintenance workers arrived at the natatorium. They erected scaffolding at the deep end of the pool, and over the course of a day, they mounted a simple, elegant brass plaque to the high-tiled wall, directly overlooking the spot where she had been thrown in. It was polished to a brilliant shine, impossible to miss. There was no date, no long-winded explanation of events, no flowery dedication. There were only 3 words, engraved in a clean, block font: the Rostova Standard. Those 3 words became a silent, permanent sermon. They were a challenge, a benchmark, and a warning. Every instructor who walked that pool deck, every nervous trainee who shivered at the water's edge, looked up and saw that name. It was a piece of institutional folklore made tangible, a constant testament to the fact that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one you notice the least. The story became more than just a cautionary tale. It became an active, positive force. The young airman who had spoken to Rostova took her stark advice to heart. She abandoned her attempts to keep up with the stronger male trainees in brute force and instead dedicated herself to the quiet disciplines: breath control, technique, and mental fortitude. She spent hours in the pool alone, practicing the rhythmic calm she had witnessed. A year later, she not only passed the grueling combat dive qualification course, but she shattered the base record for underwater navigation. When her commanding officer asked for the secret to her success, she gave the same simple answer she had received: "I learned to control my breathing, sir." Everything else followed. Rostova's quiet competence had become a self-propagating legacy, a seed of true professionalism that was now growing in the actions of those she had inspired, proving that a single act of disciplined excellence could change the culture of an entire institution. 5 years passed. The Special Warfare Training Center's natatorium was now globally recognized as the premier aquatic training facility in the armed forces. Its safety record was immaculate, and its graduates were known for their unparalleled capabilities in the water, a reputation built on a foundation of quiet discipline rather than brute strength. The lead instructor, now Master Sergeant Thorne, was a different man. The years had weathered him, replacing his youthful arrogance with a quiet, confident authority. He was widely respected as the toughest but most profoundly fair teacher on the base. He would often stand by the gleaming brass plaque, using it as the centerpiece of his introductory lecture. He would point to the name on the wall and tell the new classes that respect is not a function of the volume of your voice, but of the depth of your discipline. The story of the bound Master Sergeant was no longer gossip. It was an official part of the curriculum. It served as an inspirational fable, a core lesson in the unwritten doctrines of the special operations community. Never underestimate your adversary. Never mistake silence for weakness. Mastery is quiet. And above all, understand that your mind is the ultimate weapon, capable of overcoming any physical bond if it is sharp enough, calm enough, and disciplined enough. The legend had become doctrine, a foundational myth that shaped the mindset of a new generation of warriors. True strength, the kind that endures, is not measured in the weight you can lift or the noise you can make in a room. It is measured in the calm you can maintain when the pressure is crushing you, in the precision you can execute when chaos is all around. It is the quiet confidence that requires no external validation, the supreme skill honed in thousands of hours of unseen, unglamorous, and unrelenting repetition. It is the ethos of the true professional who lets their actions speak for them, knowing that results are the only language that holds any real meaning. Master Sergeant Eva Rostova left behind more than a story or a plaque. She left behind a standard, a silent, unyielding expectation of excellence that resonated far louder and lasted far longer than any shouted boast or insult ever could. The impact of that day continued to ripple forward, a stone cast into the institutional pond. The final scene of this chapter unfolded under the same harsh fluorescent lights, in the same humid, chlorine-scented air. A new class of trainees stood at the edge of the pool, their faces a mixture of fear and determination. Among them was a young woman, small in stature, with a look of intense concentration that bordered on anxiety. She looked just as unassuming as Rostova had years before. Master Sergeant Thorne walked down the line, his eyes scanning each candidate. His gaze was no longer dismissive, it was diagnostic. He was searching for the spark of quiet competence, not the flash of loud confidence. He stopped in front of the young woman. The old Thorne would have seen a target. The new Thorne saw potential. He leaned in, and the trainees around her flinched, expecting the familiar tirade of an old-school instructor. Instead, Thorne's voice was low and steady, meant for her alone. "Control your breathing," he said, the words carrying the weight of a lesson learned the hard way. Everything else follows. He saw the flicker of understanding in her eyes, gave her a slight, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement, and moved on. The cycle of prejudice had been broken. It had been replaced by a cycle of mentorship, a legacy of wisdom passed from one generation to the next. Eva Rostova's true legacy was not a medal on her chest or a plaque on a wall. It was this moment. It was the fundamental, cultural shift from judging by appearance to assessing by character and potential. It was the quiet, deeply ingrained understanding that competence is the only currency that truly matters in the high-stakes world of the quiet professional. They do not seek the spotlight, for their work is done in the shadows. They do not require praise, for their validation comes from the successful completion of the mission. Their silence is not emptiness. It is a fortress built brick by brick with discipline, training, and an unbreakable will. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent discipline defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.